All right, welcome to my reaction to Week 13 for the NFL. This is going to be a quick reaction. All the games starting from Thanksgiving, Black Friday, on through the weekend on Sunday, and then the final Monday night game final game of Week 13. Just some quick thoughts going through some of them. This week, Week 13 was about as wild as the season of 2025 has been. So it was very entertaining, and it was very indicative of how just crazy the NFL overall is as a product throughout this season so far. A lot of surprising stuff as far as standings go, and even game to game, just a lot of surprises here and there. It's definitely been a more challenging year to bet NFL games, which is a good thing in my opinion. It's a good thing that games are that specific games and even the season as a whole. It's a good thing that is tougher to predict this year, because that often means more entertaining games. Because you're not able to just turn on a game and just instantly know what's going to happen without actually seeing it happen. And in recent years, it's kind of felt like some of the parity in the NFL has struggled a little bit. We've seen in recent years, we've seen the bottom of the NFL, the worst teams, and the top of the NFL, the best. We've seen that in recent years separate a little bit, to where you have more and more teams that just feel like they can't compete with anybody, and a handful of teams that are just going to stomp everybody else. And certainly we still have had some dominant teams and certainly some horrible teams this year, but I feel like that the middle of the NFL and the competitive bit of the NFL is a lot bigger this year than it has been in recent years. And even from top to bottom, just straight up big upsets and weird dynamics between teams. It's been a lot more. There's just been a lot more parity within this season than there has been recently. And look no further than Thanksgiving for that, of course. Now, we started off the day with what felt like a back to old traditions, with the Lions losing a home game to start off Thanksgiving against a rival, which generally ends up being either the Bears or the Packers. Sometimes the Vikings, of course. It's that Lions game, always a divisional game, but generally has been the Bears or the Packers, not quite as often the Vikings in that spot. But in the last 5-ish years, we've gotten used to the Lions actually winning these games on Thanksgiving. Not the case this year. The Green Bay Packers go into Detroit and win the game pretty handily. The score actually doesn't really reflect that, winning 31-24. So scoring-wise, actually pretty close, within a one-score game. But the Packers controlled the game throughout the whole time. The Packers were very much in control of the game. This was one of the games so far this season, and especially in the last month or so, it's becoming more and more apparent that it really does feel like the Lions are missing Ben Johnson on their offense. They not only Ben Johnson, but they're just missing other things, as well as the offensive line, which of course often gets overlooked. This Lions team, for the most part, most of the talent is still there. A lot of the coaching staff, outside of the two coordinators from last year and before, most of the rest of the Lions organization right now is the same. And sure, they've got a 7-5 record, so still a winning record, but they currently sit at third in the division, and as things sit right now, they'd be out of the playoffs. They're currently sitting in the 8th position, 8th seed in the NFC, which is not enough to get into the playoffs. And right now, honestly, the Lions, especially with the momentum that they feel like they have in the last couple weeks, which is a negative momentum, they feel like they're in serious, like there's a serious chance that they straight up miss the playoffs. Again, we've got 5 weeks left in the season, so there's plenty of time for Dan Campbell and the Lions to, if they can figure things out, get into a rhythm on offense. They can win some games and get in at least as a wild card, and even winning the division is not out of reach yet. However, with the way that the Green Bay Packers just winning against them this week, and the Bears, the way the Packers and the Bears are playing, and just simply with the current records, the Lions are going to have to do a lot better the last 5 games of the week, and they're going to possibly need some help from other teams in order to win the division, and even to get into the playoffs at this point, even as a wild card, because the wild card selection is going to be very competitive in the NFC this year. It's going to be tough, honestly, at this point for the Lions to even make the playoffs. As it stands right now, they're effectively 1.5-ish games behind even just getting into the wild card picture right now. So the Lions have some work to do, and they don't necessarily have the easiest schedule either. But yeah, the score doesn't show it, but Thanksgiving, the Lions game was concerning. They obviously miss pieces on the offensive line. Lions fans, of course, got a moment of hope last week when the news was announced that they might be getting a player back off retirement. Turns out that's not going to work out for them. Failed the physical, and so that he won't be able to rejoin the Lions due to a hamstring tear, which sounds like it was pretty serious. Kind of crazy that he didn't expect to fail the physical. I don't know, maybe he did, but so they're not going to get that little bit of hope back for their offense. And so yeah, Ben Johnson's not walking back through that door. And even though you've got the same talent for the most part as far as weapons go, you are missing Sam Laporta. That's another thing. You are missing your star tight end. You got the same running backs though. You got Sonic and Knuckles. You've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, although another little bit of bad news is that there's reporting that going into Week 14, Amon-Ra might be injured, so that'll be something to keep an eye on going into their Thursday matchup against the Cowboys. I worry for the Lions a little bit. They just play calling wise, decision wise. They just don't feel quite there anymore. They feel like they miss the rhythm that they had with Ben Johnson as the play caller. And I have a lot of respect for Dan Campbell. I think he's a good coach, but again, sometimes the decision making in certain spots, sure, he sticks to his guns and what he and the Lions have established as their identity, but sometimes it feels a little bit too robotic, a little bit too set in stone. And, I think before with Ben Johnson and even with Aaron Glenn as your defensive coordinator, they did so good at coordinating from play to play. You could sometimes, that identity that Campbell was instilling of being physical and also, being very much for going for it most of the time, that worked for them, that had been working for them. But right now they just, as an offense, they don't have the rhythm they used to have. They're giving up too many points week to week. And just overall the offense from Jared Goff to the running game, to the passing game, it's regressed a good bit. And so, yeah, again, they've got still a winning record right now, but a winning record is not going to be enough to get you into the playoffs this year in the NFC. So a bit of concern for the Lions. Good win for the Packers. They're just a half game behind the Bears for a lead of the division and currently what would be a lead for the conference for the number 1 seed in the conference. The other games, Thanksgiving, we had the Chiefs visiting the Cowboys. This was another one that was, effectively an upset. Most had picked the Chiefs to go into Dallas. You got to Chiefs team that's desperate, needs to win. Going into Dallas, a team that's got pretty much this whole season has had a horrible defense, coupled with a good offense. But as we've seen for the Cowboys most of the season, especially early on, it was just horrible defense with an offense that just couldn't keep up with what the defense was demanding that they put up. But we've, to the Cowboys' credit, we've seen that turn around a little bit. And to the credit of Jerry Jones, there's been a lot of questioning, of course, and doubting on decisions that they've made, including some of the trades they made at the trade deadline. But it seems like, to Jerry's credit, some of those moves are actually kind of working. Especially since the trade deadline, their defense has gotten a little better. It still ranks bottom half of the league in most stats, but it's certainly gotten a bit better the last few weeks, and the defense has held up well enough against some better teams that it seems like the Cowboys might be turning the momentum around in a positive direction. Also with that offense, they went through a few weeks there where, the offense was high powered, but they were dealing with some injuries, mainly with CeeDee Lamb. But we've seen George Pickens, jump onto the scene, be a huge part for the Cowboys. With that, we're seeing Dak Prescott play, career level. We're seeing, the Cowboys' run game is actually somewhat viable. They still don't have a very strong run game. It's still very much a powerful passing offense with Dak Prescott. But their run game is certainly feeling a little bit more useful to them than it has in the last couple of years that it did with Mike McCarthy, where it really struggled. But at home we ended up with a huge upset win for the Cowboys, winning 31-28. This was it was certainly the best game of the day for Thanksgiving. But the Cowboys able to get the win. They get to 6-5-1. Kick the Chiefs down to 6-6, and from here on, already going into this game for the Cowboys, they were kind of already in the position of pretty much have to win out. Chiefs now at 6-6, they pretty much have to win out now as well. So for both the Chiefs and the Cowboys, they're going to be very interesting to watch going forward, because again, we got 5 weeks left, and for both teams, both teams have had their bye weeks, so they've got 5 games, and both teams really need to pretty much win all 5. Certainly the Cowboys do need to win all 5, and even the Chiefs most likely need to win 5, if not 4 out of those 5. And if it is 4 out of those 5, it needs to be a specific combination of them. Otherwise, if either of these two teams loses one more game out of the 5 games they got left, there's good chances they're both out. Or there's a good chance that team is out. So, the result of that Chiefs-Cowboys game, actually pretty nice, because it just adds that extra layer of intrigue to any game that these two teams are involved with, at least for now, until they've lost too many and they're out of the picture. But, it was an entertaining game. It's tough to not be concerned and doubt the Chiefs at this point. At least if you're coming from the perspective of a Chiefs fan. Obviously, I know for a lot of us, won't necessarily be too sad to see the Chiefs miss the playoffs 1 year out of the last decade. They've had plenty of success in recent years, so I'm not going to feel bad for the Chiefs. But the way things have been going for them, certainly concerning. They've had a lot of games this year that have been close one-score matches that usually with Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, you expect them to find ways to win. But this year they just have not been able to do it. And it's kind of tough to totally explain why. Part of it is the Chiefs' offense sometimes feels like it gets out of rhythm. They have, a quarter or two here and there sometimes where they just can't seem to get anything going. Also, the Chiefs' defense doesn't feel like it's quite as good as it has been the last couple of years. So I think that those two things kind of combine to where I wouldn't say the Chiefs are bad at any phases of the game, offense, defense, special teams. I wouldn't say they're bad at any phase of the game, but they feel like they have enough weaknesses in specific spots on each of those phases that it feels like teams that have powerful enough of one phase or two phases of football can be exploited if it's a decent enough team. And even if it's not the greatest team, it feels like this Chiefs team struggles to pull away, certainly in games against competent opponents. So pretty concerned for the Chiefs for their playoff hopes. I would not be surprised if they miss the playoffs. As a matter of fact, I may have put just a tiny little bit of a bet on the possibility of them missing. I certainly could still see the Chiefs making it. And again, this was a tiny bet that I placed. But right now, the current momentum that the Chiefs have, also the schedule the Chiefs have coming up, they do have some tough games coming up. And I've seen enough concerning stuff from them this year, and certainly in the last month or so, that there's a couple of those key games that the Chiefs are going to have that I just don't know that I trust they're going to be able to pull it out this year. Final game for Thanksgiving was the Bengals at the Ravens. This was another game that was a bit of a surprise. Really, all three Thanksgiving games, the Black Friday game, first 4 games of the week, pretty much all of them went the opposite way of whatever the majority would have voted. So, first game, majority was with the Lions. Second game, majority was with the Chiefs. Third, majority was with the Ravens. And then the fourth, that being Black Friday, majority was with the Eagles. All 4 of those teams lost. So, it just goes to show that, again, this was, like I said earlier, this week was great for parity as far as giving us outcomes that at least the majority of viewers, including people in the media, including, whatever, including plenty of bettors, a lot of outcomes that people weren't necessarily expecting. For the Bengals-Ravens game, the unfortunate thing about that game is, the Bengals finally get Joe Burrow back, and the Bengals looked amazing. Their offense looked great, which it's looked pretty good all year, including without Joe Burrow. But their defense, Bengals defense, which is bottom like 2 or 3 in the league in almost every category, the defense actually looked kind of okay. Tough to say how much of that is the Bengals defense maybe turning the page a little bit as we get towards the end of the season, and how much of that was the Ravens, who have some serious concerns as a team, offense and defense. It felt like for the Ravens, they started off really cold, started off really bad, and then they kind of hit that switch, towards the middle of the season where it felt like the Ravens were on a really good upward trajectory that might carry them into a high seed in the playoffs. But it feels like for the Ravens that momentum really never went far enough. It really never took hold. Including with the fact of like the Ravens running game. Obviously, when you have Lamar Jackson as your quarterback and Derrick Henry as your running back, you'd expect and you'd kind of hope that is a huge driving force of your team. It just hasn't been there. Maybe it's because of just the immense amount of workload that was on Derrick Henry and that kind of stuff last year, but he hasn't popped the same way he did last year. And Lamar as well. Lamar, some of it seems to be due to injury and lingering stuff like that. But Lamar just doesn't feel like the same type of runner that he has been in recent years. His passing numbers have declined a little bit this year compared to the last couple years. And so, yeah, the Ravens just, their offense seems to have gotten a little better. Their defense seems to have gotten a little better. It's another one that was a struggling defense early on in the season. Feels like they've gotten a little better, but obviously they still gave up 32 points on Thanksgiving night at home, but against a high-powered offense in the Bengals that have been putting up a lot of points against almost everybody, even without Joe Burrow. But the unfortunate thing about this game was, it was the exciting, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. We did get that, and it was great for the Bengals to see them get the upset win, but it was just unfortunate because, these are two franchises that have been pretty entertaining to see them get into the playoffs. The Bills, the Chiefs, those have been four teams that in the last 5 or so years have quite consistently been competing with each other, all have top-tier quarterbacks, and therefore they've all been, playing each other a lot in season and in the playoffs. But, based off the outcome of the game and where the two teams are at, it feels like we may end up seeing both or at least one team out of this matchup miss the playoffs. Certainly that being with the Bengals, and that's part of why I say it feels unfortunate, is the Bengals went into this game already with a record of 3-8. So, at this point, even if they do win out, the best record they're going to be able to get is 9-8. So to get into the playoffs with a 9-8 record at this point, not very likely. Now, the good thing for the Bengals this year is that the AFC North is looking to be one of those divisions that is going to end up just having one team in the playoffs, and that'll be the fourth seeded team. So for the Bengals, they actually have more hopes of winning the division and getting the fourth seed than they do really of getting a wild card berth. I would say it's safe to count them out of the wild card, but for the division, they're technically not out yet. And certainly a win this past week against the Ravens helps. But for the Bengals, you're still going to need to basically win out, and you're going to need as many losses for the Ravens and the Steelers going forward as possible. So, and Bengals do have some more games coming up within that division that'll help, but being that they came into this week 3-8, they're now 4-8 with the win. It feels like, getting Joe Burrow back, maybe getting some positive momentum, feels like it might be a little bit, too little too late. And for the Ravens, you're at 6-6. Again, it's just, it's a team that feels like it has a lot of holes, a weak defense that's been struggling most of the year. And again, an offense that just doesn't feel right when you watch it, especially for the talent that they have and for the names that they have and what we've seen from them in recent years. I mean, you can even just look at it for the Ravens. You can see it even just in fantasy if you're a fantasy player, from Lamar to Derrick Henry, a lot of their star players that might be popular for fantasy, their numbers in fantasy this year have been abysmal. Especially Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson have been massively disappointing for fantasy this year. So, just kind of disappointing stuff for the Ravens. Again, they're certainly not out of it as well. They're in a better position at the moment than the Bengals are for the playoff race. Ravens currently do hold the lead of the division, so if the playoffs started today, they would be in. But the Ravens are only just barely holding that over the Steelers, who are also at 6-6. They just happen to hold the tiebreaker at the moment. So certainly a lot more work to be done. For the Steelers, Ravens, and Bengals, can't count any of those three out yet. Of course, the Bengals have the most work left to do, but the door's not closed for them. I mean, you got the Steelers who are struggling on offense like usual. With Aaron Rodgers showing age, getting beat up, Tomlin and the Steelers getting booed at home this past week. The door's not shut yet for the Bengals, but again, it feels a little unfortunate for them. It feels like you worry that maybe they're turning things around a little bit too late, and even if they do get into the playoffs as the number 4 seed, and you end up hosting Chargers or the Bills or something like that, or the Colts, a team like that, maybe the Jaguars. It certainly feels like one of those fourth-seeded teams that could end up losing in the wild card round of the playoffs, mainly just because, for the Bengals and for really the Ravens as well, the defenses are just struggling too much. But yeah, so then moving on to Black Friday really quick, of course, was the Chicago Bears going to Philly to visit the Eagles, and this was, again, the fourth game of the week, and it was the fourth game that went the opposite of what the public and the majority would have predicted. The Bears go into Philly and win the game 24-15, and yes, I was, if you've been watching my videos, I was a part of that majority. Even as a Bears fan, I was a part of that majority that was saying, yeah, Bears are probably going in and probably going to lose this one. The Bears were underdogs of 7, 7.5, 6.5, depending on when and where you looked at sports bets. But for the most part, the Bears were basically a touchdown underdog, which pretty big number, especially being that both of these teams were coming in with really good record. Both teams were coming into this game at 8-3. So obviously there was a lot of a lot more belief in the Eagles, especially being at home. That helped. But I mean, even if this game had been in Chicago, I still venture to imagine the spread would have at best maybe been +3, +2.5, that kind of a thing for the Bears. I don't think the odds making would have been too much different had this been in Soldier Field, because again, you got the reigning Super Bowl champs that, even though they've had a lot of drama, they've still been winning through it. In many of these weeks, they've had wins against teams that we perceive as being really good, and so it makes sense that the majority was on them. And you had the Bears, who are already massively outperforming expectations that most people had on them, and Bears team that arguably, sure, coming into Black Friday, hadn't necessarily won against the most amazing opponents out there, but I said it going into the games last week. I said it that this was a chance for the Bears to make a statement, an absolute statement-worthy game, and the Bears went in and did it. This was not just some win that they just barely squeaked out, or because that was the other thing with the Bears, is a lot of the games they've played and won this year, they've all come down to the wire, and many of them have been last-second comebacks from Caleb Williams, either with a touchdown or with a walk-off field goal by Cairo Santos. So, and again, some of those coming against teams that we perceive as being much lesser than the Eagles. So for the Bears to go in there to Philadelphia and win 24-15 and win the game pretty convincingly, especially through the ground, they just bullied this Eagles team physically. It was one of those games where it's not an uncommon thing to be talked about, but with the run game, if you can have a dominant run game, there's something special about that, because if you go into against any opponent, and if you can establish dominance with your offensive line and running the ball, there's almost nothing that your opponent can do at that point, because you're able, if you're able to run the ball consistently and get good chunk yardage, even if it's semi-small. I mean, all you need for a good run game is an average of 3.5, 4 yards per carry, and that's a dominant run game. If you're able to establish that, and you're able to have the discipline to just stick with that, because that is one thing that a lot of coaches at all levels in modern football, including the NFL, that is one thing that a lot of coaches struggle with, is having the discipline to stick with the run, because obviously the passing game is fun. It's fun to watch. It's fun to coach, especially for certain coaches. And the passing game can, at times, of course, give you more easy, explosive plays. at times. But if you just stick with the run, it can have explosives for you as well. And even if it's not necessarily being explosive, you're going to be wearing down on the defense more and more. You're going to be taking up more of the clock and therefore giving the opponent's offense less time to work. And so that's what the Bears were able to come in and do. And this was against a Vic Fangio-led defense and an Eagles team that has been pretty physical in recent years, and certainly last year when they won the Super Bowl. Certainly a team that has been a very physical, veteran-led team. Now, they have lost some top veteran, future Hall of Fame level talent in the last couple of years, including on the offensive line with guys like Jason Kelce. They have lost some of that talent, but obviously this is still a team that came into the season as number 1 or 2 favorite to win the Super Bowl, and they are at 8-4. But the Bears went in there and looked a lot like the Lions have in past years. Very obvious that Ben Johnson is getting his offensive identity very much ingrained into the Bears already, which I love how fast he's been able to do that. Because it basically looked like the Bears had a Sonic and Knuckles between DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai, who really has come out and shown the last few weeks. Those two guys, 22 carries for Monangai, 18 for Swift, 130, 125, so 255 yards between the two of them, each of them getting a touchdown, both averaging, Monangai averaging 5.9 and Swift averaging 6.9 per carry. Both had both of them, their longs were over 20 yards. And even with mixing things in with Caleb running it occasionally, jet sweeps, and then also just the play action pass game off of that Ben Johnson has, it's super fun to watch, especially as a Bears fan who, at best is used to watching good defense and mediocre offense most of the time. This is a Bears offense or Bears team, but especially offense, that is just really impressive and very encouraging to see how much it's improved and how much of that Ben Johnson offensive identity you can just very easily see comparing this offense to the Lions in recent years. It's encouraging to see how much the team is buying into what Ben Johnson is selling. And also to the Bears defensive credit as well. This Bears defense has been bottom half of the league in a lot of metrics, mainly in yards given up, rushing and passing. But this defense basically all year has led the league in takeaways. They still currently do. As a matter of fact, for individual interception leaders in the league, the Bears have like 3 or 4 out of the top 5 on the team. Led by Kevin Byard, great veteran DB. And this is a Bears defense that coming into Week 13 had been missing 2 starting Pro Bowl level defensive backs in Kyler Gordon and Jalen Johnson. And this was a team that this week against the Eagles was missing all 3 of its starting linebackers. So, of course, the Bears did get Kyler Gordon and Jalen Johnson back against the Eagles, but we're missing those 3 linebackers. So this is a defense that really hasn't had its full list of starters all year. And to the credit of Dennis Allen and those players on defense, they've, regardless of injuries they've had, and regardless of the fact that yes, there is plenty of room for the defense to improve, it's a very opportunistic defense with the takeaways that they've been able to create. And certainly in the last month or so, this is yet another defense that has seemed to improve a bit in the last month or so. And especially going into December, into colder weather, being a team that plays in cold weather. For the Bears, it is very much a encouraging sign to see the defense improving towards the end of the season. Looking at other games really quick throughout Week 13, Niners dominate on the road against the Browns, who have typically done pretty well at home. You had the Texans get a win over the Colts at home, or at home for the Colts, I should say. A lot of concern for the Colts at this point. Started off the season really hot, looking like they were going to be maybe the dark horse team of the league this year. But in the last few weeks, they've dropped a bunch of games, and they've just looked not that great, really, since they came back from their trip over to Europe. They've just not looked the same since then. Daniel Jones has been struggling more since then. It's also been revealed in this last week that he's also now been playing with basically a broken leg. So obviously that's hurting them. Jonathan Taylor still putting up good numbers, still carrying the ball a ton for them, but he's been getting bottled up more and more as defenses have been able to just focus on stopping the run and forcing the Cowboys, or forcing the Colts to try to pass on them. And again, with Daniel Jones having injury, and also, being Daniel Jones, again, he's been certainly outperforming what he has been, but I have concerns for the Colts. They just have not looked that good this last month or so, and they are a team that, as far as positive or negative momentum goes, and comparing it to where they felt, a month and a half ago, the Colts are one of the teams that I'm the most concerned for. It was one that they were leading the conference, they were leading their division, got out to a ton of wins at the start of the season, and it feels like they're going completely backwards. And they're still at a record of 8-4. But I worry that they're going to miss the playoffs at this point. I really do. Certainly, right now, if the playoffs started today, they would be in it. But they no longer lead their division, and they wouldn't even be the number 5 seed. Currently, they sit in the number 6 seed, which currently the AFC wildcard, all 3 teams are 8-4. So, and that there is a tiny gap between 7 and 8 in the AFC right now, but the way the current momentum is going for the Colts, and actually being that number 8 is the Texans, who they've got one of the best defenses in the league, just beat the Colts. Texans feel the opposite of the Colts. They started off bad, and now they've got some really good momentum going. I would not be surprised. That the Colts have already let the Jaguars pass them up. They play the Jaguars in Jacksonville this upcoming week, and just lost the Texans at home. So for the Colts, I feel like they're going the wrong way, and the Jaguars and Texans are threatening to push them out of the playoffs, and into third in their division. And other games for the week, not a ton of super exciting stuff. You had the Jets getting a win over the Falcons in a loser bowl, but still a good one for the Jets at home, with a walk-off field goal win for Nick Folk, who is a very old veteran kicker, so good for him. Buccaneers barely squeaking out a win against the Cardinals. Buccaneers feel like they're getting some key guys back from injury, which is a good thing. The Rams getting upset on the road by the Panthers. That was an impressive one. One of the more entertaining games of the week. And the Panthers, really a tough team to read. They currently sit at 7-6, very much alive for a playoff race at the very least. keeping the pressure on for the Buccaneers. If the Buccaneers slip up too much, the Panthers very much could swoop in and take the number 4 seed from them. But, the Panthers have, for the most part this season, played better at home. So, it's not too much of a surprise that they at least did better this week than what they looked like last week against the 49ers. But, comparing the 49ers and the Rams, especially due to like injury and things like that and just recent performance, the Rams coming into this week had looked like the best team in the league, bar none. And even after this game, most people are still going to, if they're doing top 10 rankings, that kind of thing, most people are still going to have the Rams as a top 2 or 3 team, if not still the number 1 team. So for the Panthers to get the win at home over the Rams, pretty impressive. 31-28 victory there for the Panthers. So they keep their playoff hopes alive. Not a perfect team, but again, able to beat and get an upset win against the LA Rams. Seahawks shut out the Vikings. Vikings just having a season from hell, especially when it comes to quarterback. Vikings fans calling for Kevin O'Connell's job at this point, which is crazy to think that you can, that's the game that is the NFL. It's brutal, not for long. Is what it kind of stands for players and coaches, because you can have 1 year where you're the head coach and you're leading your team to double-digit wins and all that the Vikings did last year, looking super great, and you make a mistake as far as a decision at quarterback, and your team starts losing games. It starts snowballing, and just 1 year removed from that double-digit win season, your fan base is calling for your job. So, I feel like to some extent not to lecture Vikings fans or anything at all, certainly don't blame you. Some of the decision-making around the quarterback position for the Vikings and play calling this year, some of those things certainly valid to criticize Kevin O'Connell on, but it's one of those where if I'm a Vikings fan, I would have at least a little hesitation as far as hoping for Kevin O'Connell to get fired, because if you get fired, my question is, who's his replacement? Who are you bringing in that is better? Again, I'm not saying that Kevin O'Connell is a perfect coach, but just last year, he and that team, mostly the same roster, got you to, up into double-digit wins. I think it was, 12, 13 wins they had last year. They looked really good last year. So to go from that to 1 year later wanting to fire the head coach, I would have some hesitation about that, just because, again, who are you going to bring in that you are certain is going to turn things around? The unfortunate thing for the Vikings is they kind of got unlucky at quarterback. You had Sam Darnold last year, who, sure, he looked, had a career year last year, earned himself a great contract with the Seahawks. But Sam Darnold had looked terrible up until last year. And so obviously for the Vikings, you have confidence in Kevin O'Connell, and you have the belief of, okay, maybe our roster, our coaching, maybe we helped Sam Darnold improve. Maybe he goes into pumpkin mode this next year. Maybe he doesn't, but hey, we're going to let him go. We're going to let him go, and we're going to have faith yet again that we can do that same thing with a younger quarterback that we drafted, and we're going to go from there. We've got a good roster. We should be able to at least stay afloat while our younger quarterback gets up to speed. Obviously, that's the hope that the Vikings and Kevin O'Connell will have had coming into this year. Obviously, that has backfired on them. But, I do think to some extent you got to look at it from their point of view and where they would have been last year. And, it's not impossible to see how they came to the conclusion that they did. Obviously, it's a results-driven business in sports, and especially in the NFL. But, again, I'm not even necessarily talking about fairness necessarily for Kevin O'Connell. If you're a Vikings fan, I just caution against getting too excited about the idea of firing Kevin O'Connell or anything like that, just because what coach is out there that is a guarantee to be a better option for you? I've even heard, seen theories and stuff from fans of maybe the Vikings should try to get Mike Tomlin. Heck, maybe the Steelers and Vikings should trade coaches, being that both fan bases are kind of upset with those coaches. And I really for both franchises, I would question that move a little bit. I certainly don't think a coach trade like that is going to happen. But even just in general for the Vikings, do you really want Mike Tomlin, who, yeah, he could get your defense going great, but you already have one of the better defensive coordinators in the league. Why do you want to bring in Mike Tomlin? He doesn't have a good record with quarterbacks. Certainly in the last decade. I mean, outside of when the Steelers had Big Ben, when have the Steelers had good quarterback play or really good offense outside of with the Steelers? So for the Vikings, where one of your biggest concerns right now is quarterback, is Mike Tomlin really going to be the best option? And also for the Steelers, as far as that whole scenario goes of trade the coaches, for the Steelers, does bringing in Kevin O'Connell help you? It might on offense. Certainly your offense will probably get better, certainly in the passing game. But first of all, you're going to need a better quarterback you're going to need another quarterback to do that. You're not going to have Aaron Rodgers past maybe next year. That's if Rodgers decides to play in 2026. And, Rodgers certainly shows his age, still plays very good for the age, but in 2026, is he going to be worth keeping around? Is he even going to want to stick around at that point? Tough to say, but obviously, if you're the Steelers, if you do bring in a different coach, you're looking at at least somewhat of a rebuild. So, being that you're the Steelers and you don't have the worst record, you don't have a record that's as bad as the Vikings, you're once again going to have a middle tier draft pick. This season, the draft class for quarterbacks is also seen as being pretty weak. So even just in general, as far as drafting a quarterback, probably not the greatest year to try to do that. I guess you could try to pick up, a quarterback in their prime, another late career quarterback, but I don't know who's out there that would really be that great of an improvement for you. Certainly not one that would improve your offense long term if you had a Kevin O'Connell as your coach. But yeah, so especially for the Vikings, I would just say, as far as firing Kevin O'Connell, who's really going to be the better alternative that you're going to bring in this year if you fire Kevin O'Connell? With Mike Tomlin, I still think you have kind of that tough question. At least with Tomlin and the Steelers, as I've said over the last couple of years, I could at least somewhat understand moving on there. Even if it was a mutual parting or a trade that happened, I can kind of see it in the sense of they've been together forever. It's a franchise and coach marriage that has been around for a super long time as far by NFL standards. And so, to some extent, it kind of feels like, especially being that the Steelers for so many years now have just consistently been middle of the pack almost every year with very little variation. To some extent with the Steelers, it kind of feels like it might just be time for a change of scenery for both sides. Maybe Tomlin can go somewhere else and do better with another team that already has an established veteran quarterback that just maybe needs a better defense, that kind of a thing. Maybe with a franchise that just is struggling and needs more of a, needs a culture builder in Tomlin. But, so for the Steelers, in a way, I could almost see moving on from the head coach more with the Steelers than I could with the Vikings. But still, for both franchises, again, anytime you remove the head coach, my question is, who are you bringing in, and how confident are you really that new person is going to be any better? And again, that's not how it goes. Often, sometimes it's just simply, we got to make a change. The change we make, we just got to hope it works. And hey, if it doesn't, at least we said we tried, and, at least it gives our fan base excitement for an off season or so. But sometimes I feel like, especially with the dysfunctional teams, that's all it is it's just a cycling door of just fire head coach, hire a new head coach, build hype up for your fan base for an off season, maybe two. Things don't go well, fire that head coach, repeat the cycle all over again, and just mire in muck and trash in the league year after year. That's what a lot of these dysfunctional franchises fall into. Steelers certainly haven't been a dysfunctional franchise. As far as any franchise, they've been one of the most loyal out there to coaches, which to some extent I think has been a good thing for them. I mean, obviously, look at all the Super Bowls they have as a franchise, but certainly in recent years, obviously, the loyalty between them and Mike Tomlin, it does feel like it's close to, if not already run its course by the end of this year. Against too many years of being 8-8, 8-9, 9-8, at best maybe 11-5, that kind of a thing. 11-6 nowadays is what it is, but that, and then get into the wild card and lose. That's kind of what it's been year in and year out for the Steelers for almost a decade now. So, for the Steelers, I can kind of understand the sentiment of wanting to move on, wanting a change, but again, still, who are you going to get? I'm not saying that there aren't good coaching candidates out there right now, but again, which one are you going to actually end up with? And whichever head coach candidate you do end up with, are they truly going to be the right fit for what your franchise needs? Obviously, tough question to answer for sure, and that's why we play the games. But yeah, so that's kind of my feeling for both of those two teams. Otherwise, Sunday Night Football had a really close, really entertaining matchup between the Broncos and the Commanders that I had not expected to be that close. I had expected the Broncos to dog walk the Commanders. Now, to be fair, the Broncos, one of the knocks on them is they have struggled to put any team away this year. But, they did still come out with the win in overtime, partially thanks to the Commanders getting a touchdown, deciding to go for two in overtime and failing. And that gave the Broncos the win there. But that ended the game. But, for the Broncos, 10-2, again, sure, maybe a little concerning. Some might argue fraudulent just because of how many very close games they've had, and their inability to put away even a struggling team like the Commanders. But it was at least an entertaining game, and the Broncos at 10-2, pretty good team, very dominant defense. And when you got Sean Payton as your head coach, who's a very good offensive coach, hard to count out the Broncos. I think they're going to do pretty well this year in the playoffs. Would not be surprised if they won the AFC number one seed. And then final game of the week, the other team at the top of the AFC, that being the New England Patriots, who do currently have the number one seed. they stomped the Giants. That game was boring. That was the game that I was expecting out of the Commanders and Broncos. To be honest, I was expecting both of those two games to be like that. It just so happened that one was super close up to the end, and one was not. The Giants look hopeless. Even with Jackson Dart back in finally, the Giants just don't have it. They've got talent on defense. They've got talent certainly on offense, some of which is hurt, some of which is very young. The Giants I feel like the Giants do need a coach who is, I don't know who the best candidate would be, in my opinion, for the Giants, but if you're the Giants, my first thing is you do have Jackson Dart, who is a quarterback who has shown a lot of talent, but of course, obviously with him and with Cam Scatterbo, your young star running back, with both of those two, they've shown plenty of signs of not having any care in the world about protecting themselves. And Jackson Dart even doubled down in post-game press conferences after last night, where against the Patriots, he came back in off of missing multiple weeks due to concussion, came back in and yet again was taking a bunch of hard hits that, as a quarterback, he should be trying to avoid on occasion. Should be learning to try to slide at certain points a little bit more than he is. He's got to learn that one of the best abilities of a quarterback, especially in the NFL, is the ability to be available. Being available for your team week in and week out is better than getting the extra 1 or 2 yards on a specific play and getting concussed and being gone for multiple weeks. Again, it's football, and I respect the mentality of wanting to be physical and wanting to be tough, but so that's the thing. For the Giants, as far as a head coach, they need to bring in somebody who, maybe more of a veteran coach. One name I've heard put out there is Mike McCarthy. That's certainly a coach that could come in and instill a good winning culture. Again, whatever you think of McCarthy, both with the Packers and with the Cowboys, he had multiple double-digit winning seasons with both franchises. With more so with established quarterbacks, at least with the Cowboys, and then even with Green Bay, most of that time being with Aaron Rodgers. But that's a possible candidate. I don't know that McCarthy would be the best, but certainly as far as big-name coaches that have experience, McCarthy's the best one that I can think of that pops up to mind. Again, one that would be a good offensive coach that could maybe help your quarterback specifically, and one that could help, in general with the team in instilling, just whatever they need to win. They've got talent on the defense. I think the Giants could be a really good defensive team. I've also heard the Giants be thrown out there as a team that maybe they could be interesting bringing in a Mike Tomlin. But again, similar to with the Vikings, my question with the Giants is, okay, sure, you could establish more of a winning culture with Mike Tomlin, but is Mike Tomlin going to be the best option to help Jackson Dart in his progress? Or are you just going to end up bringing in, if you do bring in a Mike Tomlin or another defensive head coach, sure, you maybe establish a really good defense, and maybe you establish a little bit more of a winning culture because of that. You maybe at least get to more of a middle tier in the NFL. But what's going to happen to Jackson Dart's progression? Is he gonna progress? Is he actually going to become a better quarterback, or is he going to regress? Is he going to continue to be, too careless with his own health? And is he just going to end up, fizzling out due to too many injuries? That's something that you got to be careful with a quarterback like him that does want to run and doesn't really have the biggest frame for an NFL quarterback. Certainly not a small quarterback by any means, but we've seen plenty of quarterbacks like a Cam Newton, for example, with a bigger frame that were very much a running quarterback that liked to be physical, that fizzled out towards the end due to a number of factors, including lack of offensive coaching and a lack of an ability to adjust play style to be able to stay healthy later on in their career. So those would be my concerns for the Giants going long term. Patriots, they dominated in the game on Monday, controlled the game. Patriots look super fun. Obviously, they're another team that deals with a lot of, they're frauds. Look at how easy their schedule's been. Obviously, that's why we have the playoffs, because that's when the game really changes, and that's when it's just the best teams left available. And the playoffs are where the fraudulent teams get exposed. So maybe the Patriots are one of those that happens to. But I don't know. They got Mike Vrabel, who, it's just funny. His success with the Patriots really just shines a light on just how dysfunctional the Tennessee Titans are. Not that anybody doubts that, but you have the Tennessee Titans, who hired Mike Vrabel. I believe, if I remember right, he won Coach of the Year with them pretty early on in his head coaching career with them. They go through some not so great seasons. They get too frustrated and impatient. They fire him. And what happens? He basically has a short stint off, gets hired by another team in the Patriots, franchise that has historically been more functional than the Titans. And right away, within a year, he's got that franchise winning already to double-digit wins. Vrabel seems to be one of the top. Vrabel, really right now, it's Vrabel and Ben Johnson, who are pretty much neck and neck for Coach of the Year this year. And for Vrabel, he's got this Patriots team that has very much struggled, basically since Tom Brady left, including with Bill Belichick for a couple of years. A franchise that had been driven pretty much into the ground the last 5 years, but already like that. Even though this Patriots team, they feel like they've got a young roster, they still feel roster and talent-wise like they've got a lot of spots that could be improved, but they're winning a lot of games. And again, they've had maybe a weaker schedule, but they've won a lot of games in very convincing fashion. And in a game like Monday nights against the Giants, they bullied the Giants. They were playing super physical, tackling so hard that we had paint chipping off of helmets for the Giants. So, impressive what the Patriots are doing. Week 13 was fun. It's in the books. Really excited to go into Week 14. We are now into December football. This is where it gets real. We've already seen it with late November football. A little bit of weather and that kind of stuff. But December is where it really starts getting cold in the cold weather stadiums. You get a lot more dynamic there from those games to the indoor games to the handful that are in Florida and on the coast that are still warm. This is where the elements and the weather really start playing a factor. And, the teams that are able to stay physical, and continue to fight through injuries, because everybody is hurt at this point in the season. This is where those teams really start rising from the rest of the crop. And we get into the playoff race. So, we're very much into that. Obviously very fun every week to, do the game of, okay, if this team wins and this team loses, how does this affect the playoff picture? Very, very fun there. So If you have watched this far in the video, I do appreciate you. Feel free to hit the like button. That'll help me make more videos for you here. Appreciate you. I'm going to end this one, and I will see you in the next video.